humble servant Moses is not exempted. In fact, while I was reading the lesson, feeling ko nga, when more is given, more is expected. Because I remember when I was still teaching in the College of Accountancy and Legal Management, and also teaching some subjects in the College of Law in San Beda. Grabe, may mga estudyante ko na mahihina, takot silang makipagkaibigan sa professor. Actually, no, sa experience ko. Pero yung mga alam mong magagaling, sila yung very, casual, willing to strike a conversation with their professors because they know they can hold their own. Can we hold our own before God? Or are we scared? Now, I think that's the question you have to ask yourselves. Is it okay for us to be at arm's length with God, or are we scared? We don't want to be noticed. Because Moses knew the Lord face to face. In this chapter, we can visualize the final moments of Moses. He was witnessing the splendor and the vastness of the promised land. And I could picture how the wind was blowing, the cool breeze of morning mixing with the warm rays of the sun. He was standing quietly and listening to God's voice as he was saying, "This will be yours, well, not yours, to your descendants. But you will not go there." Receiving your death sentence directly from God. How bittersweet, no? You hear God's voice talking to you. But of course, He was also condemning you to die. Now, the picture that I'm trying to convey here is that just like how we are, no? We've been trying to be faithful. We've been trying to walk the right paths. We've been trying to be of good service to our friends, to our neighbors. Pero there's still suffering. There's still some problems coming into our lives. And we are quick to blame. Well, actually, whether we like to admit it or not, we are quick to blame who else, right? Samantalang si Moses, who knew God face to face, could never complain. Paano pa tayo? Why should we complain? Should it stop us from giving glory to God just because we're suffering? So how was the life of Moses with the Israelites as a servant of God? How are we as Christians in our lives? Moses was the leader of all Israel. He endured the murmurings and the constant rebellion of Israel against God, despite all God's work. Imagine the wonders that God showed Israel, delivering mighty foes to their hands. Imagine, when I was reading Deuteronomy, one by one, kingdom by kingdom, they were conquering their enemies. Because God said, without my mighty works, you'll never achieve all of this. So that Israel will know that I am their God. And I will deliver the land like a father carrying his child. One by one, kingdom by kingdom, the Israelites devoured all the enemies, much, much stronger and much, much larger than their army. Moses faithfully served God before the eyes of Israel. He was a fitting representative of God. And his faithfulness as God's servant was upon everyone to see. He has communion with God every day. You know what is communion? Having communion. Communion is being intimate, like a friend. But there he was at the gate of the promised land, facing his death. How would you feel if you were Moses? How would you feel when we suffer disappointments despite of all our sacrifices? How do we feel when our prayers seem to be unanswered? Most especially when you think you have served God so much with all your ministries, your seemingly good deeds towards everyone, you're smiling, you're accommodating, you're reliable, you're generous. But then something comes that shatters you and you feel as if God abandoned you. Would you question God? Of course. We remember that Moses spent his 40 years as a prince of Egypt, and then as a shepherd, and then when he was called by God to go back to Egypt and lead the slaves from there to the promised land, he was already 80 years old. He did not ask why. Well, he was saying, no, I don't think I can do it. No, but later on, he believed. Now, because of what Moses did, if we use our own minds, ba't naman ganun? Ba't naman ganun ang ginawa ng Diyos kay Moses? Why was he sentenced to death? No? Moses, at that point in time, when he was told, you can't go to the promised land, he was a strong and vigorous man. After all that Moses had sacrificed to follow God's commands and the life that Moses lived, he dedicated all to God's commands and works to lead his people out of Egypt and into the promised land, and endured all the pain and hardships of bringing thousands of people, organizing them, ensuring that order is observed and God's commandments and laws are kept and enforced. In the end, he was only to be told that you can't pass further than this. I thought we were friends. I thought I was a friend that you know face to face. Kung tayo yun, ganun ang tatanungin natin sa Diyos. But Moses did not say anything. Grabe. Moses did not feel angry at God. He simply accepted his fate. Are we accepting our fate? Are we not blaming God for our misfortunes? Or are we the opposite? In fact, Moses pleaded to God. Sabi niya, Lord, baka naman pwede ko pong masilip yung promised land. You know what God said? Ayaw na kitang kausapin tungkol dito. I don't want to hear another word from you about this. Pinatahimik siya ng Diyos. No? Parang tatay na pinagagalitan ng anak. Manahimik ka na. Ayoko na marinig pa kahit na anong tungkol dyan. What's marvelous about Moses and their relationship with God, and his relationship with God, is that Moses and God know each other face to face. In Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 30 to 31, the Lord said, Moses said, the Lord your God, who is going before you, will fight for you as he did for you in Egypt, before your very eyes, and in the wilderness. There you saw how the Lord your God carried you as a father that carries his son all the way you went until you reached this place. Israel's foes are far greater and stronger than them, but each and every one was defeated. Yet, how did Israel repay God's faithfulness? They rebelled against God and murmured and turned away from Him despite all that God had done for them. Ganun din tayo eh. Despite all that God has done for us, we easily forget. When we are doing good, we praise ourselves. Galing ko. Grabe, ang galing kong dumiskarte. Pero when we're suffering, Lord, ba't mo naman ako iniwan? In the Bible, it says, even amidst all their apostasy, meaning forgetting about their belief, God did not destroy Israel. In fact, He still provided for their needs in the wilderness. How faithful is the Lord, no? Like us, we're not deserving. We're not even working much for God. We're quick to blame Him and how we are also undeserving. Yet, when we ask, it's being given to us. When we suffer, we blame our misfortunes to God. When we suffer, we ask God, why are we suffering? But when everything is good, we turn away from God and dedicate the time to ourselves. In all things, we should thank God. Even in the midst of our misfortunes. I know it's hard. Ang hirap nun. But sometimes, in the midst of misfortunes, we realize that God is inviting us to have a communion with Him. God is giving us a second chance to be with Him. He has given us all the chances from the day we were born, and it is but fitting for us to thank Him even in the midst of our misfortunes. The suffering of Israel abounded because it was of their own doing also. But still, God promised to lead them to the promised land, and He kept it. God will bring us to His kingdom, and all these sufferings are but products of sin and Satan. God will provide us our needs. All we have to do is ask. We can't fight the devil on our own. Our suffering is also the devil's work, so that we will turn away from God. But if we remain faithful and persevering, just like the Israelites, we will be able to cross the promised land, salvation. When supplies are wanting, kulang, we suffer anxiety. Pag tumawag sa iyo yung boss mo, bakit palpak yung report mo? Takot tayo. Pag tinawagan ka ng nanay at tatay mo, saan ka? Ba't hindi ka umuwi ng bahay? Takot tayo. Pero pag ang Diyos ang tumatawag sa atin, we ignore Him. And because of that lack of faith in God, we fall further into sin. We just don't realize it. Kasi we always rely, our perception is that we're the one who is very good. Pare, nakagawa ko ng paraan. Pare, nakadiskarte ako. Ang galing ko, praise the Lord. Oxymoron, di ba? Ang galing ko, pero praise the Lord. Sino ba talagang pinipraise mo? Ikaw o ang Diyos? Our lesson is bringing us in that particular part of the story where the Israelites were about to cross Canaan. In that story, part of the story, when they were about to cross, there was not enough water or provision before the Israelites. And because of their hard-headedness, the people have raised their arms against Moses. Ito na yung time na yun eh. The people were raising their arms or their weapons in rebellion. Moses lost his sister Miriam. Miriam died. He was really tired. In other words, stressed. Israel forgot how they were delivered from slavery. Just as we are being delivered from the grips of our previous lives in sin, hoping that, ito yun eh, after turning away from our sinful ways, we expect God to lay down all our needs, our desires, as if we are entitled to some kind of reward. No? After taking us out of the sin, after redeeming us, dying for us, we try to serve Him, feeling na we deserve reward. We deserve a reward. We expect something out of our efforts and works. Without God, because despite of our sacrifices, we find ourselves not as abundant as those who live in sin. On the other side, we think that why be faithful if blessings come easier if we live the way of the world? For some of us, we are headed towards that direction, although we would never admit it. Earthly possessions has always been our gauge for blessings. Parang mas blessed tayo kung marami tayong pera. Yun yung gauge natin na mahal tayo ng Diyos. We equate material abundance with God's favor. Love ako ni God kasi tinan mo, grabe yung blessing sa akin. Oh, I am so blessed because I received a big bonus this Christmas. I am so blessed because I am not borrowing money from my friends, but rather I'm the one lending to my friends. Oh, I am so blessed because I am rich. Look at me now. Be envious of my blessings. What was the real blessings of the Israelites? Was it the land flowing with milk and honey? Was it the milk and honey that they're after? Or was it the land? The promised land represents salvation, not the material things found in the land. Because if you seek salvation, all these things shall be added unto you. To be saved from slavery of sin, that's the important thing, not the milk and honey. We serve God now. Is it because of the material blessings we're expecting? What happens to our faith? What happens to us if we don't get the blessings? Do we stop? Let's keep in mind that for the wages of sin is death. As the saying goes, much is given or entrusted, much is expected. Moses was entrusted with God's powers, and he was the messenger and leader of Israel. So much was expected of him by God, especially when it comes to trusting in the Lord. So let me explain. Number one, after years of faithfulness to God, to give them their water, and perhaps there came a time when the Israelites didn't need the water that was flowing out of Rephidim, no? Yung rock. Kasi they conquered lands, and of course they get sources of water from those locations. But now, when they were about to cross the promised land, they were out of water once again. And then the Israelites were so brutal in their murmurings. They said that in the Bible it says that our brothers died for the Lord. And why do we die like we're forgotten by God? Grabe, no? Yun yung sinabi nila kay God. After dying for God, our brothers, look at us now. Kinalimutan tayo ng Diyos. And they are blaming God for allowing this inconvenience of lack of water, as if they were dying, as if God had forsaken them. They talk as if God owes them. And instead of consoling Moses for the death of Miriam, they raised their arms in rebellion. So, kung ikaw si Moses, how would you feel? God has given you water from Rephidim. God has given you food from heaven. God has delivered all our enemies into our hands. And you have all this land given to you. Yet, that's how you talk to God. So stress na si Moses, no? But ito yung we have to realize here. God was so faithful pa rin that even with these petitions from Israel, anong sabi ng Diyos? Moses, give them their water. I want you to speak to the rock and command water out of the rock. The bid to speak to the rock represents the work of God to speak to the hardened hearts of the people and command it to follow Him. When God speaks to us, are we following? We are so hard-headed that we could not even heed God's petition. But when we ask God, He answers our petition. We also expect God to answer our petition. It's so unfair. So Moses, instead of commanding water out of the rock, Moses did what? Moses smote the rock. No? Galit siya eh. Diba? Ang sabi ng Diyos, just whisper to the rock. Talk to the rock and water will flow. Because I am God. I will make water flow out of the rock because you asked for it. That's just like we are. If we ask for it, it will flow for us. So, instead of talking to the rock, nampas niya ng kanyang rod, 2 beses pa. Must we fetch water for you, from this rock again? Must we bring water for you out of this rock? These words show what is inside Moses' heart that time. As if he was responsible in bringing the water out of the rock, and it was not God. It is as if the rock was doing his bidding. No? Parang siya yung nag-uutos sa rock eh. Must I get water out of this for you? This is a common sin that all of us fall into again and again and again. No matter how long we go to church, we fall into this sin. We love hearing the words, the accolades. Ang galing mo. Ang galing mo, napalaki mo mga anak mo ng mabuti. Ang galing mo, ang taas ng score mo sa exam. Ang galing mo, ang laki ng bahay mo, ang laki ng lupa mo, ang tibay ng mukha natin. No? Because it is God who fought for us. It was God who delivered these things and not us. And as Daniel said, even if God does not save us from the furnace, we must always thank God even in our failures. In the end, nothing matters but your salvation. Moses will not cross into Canaan, for the wages of his transgressions is his death. He was hurt because of his sister's death. He was angry because he was tired of hearing the murmurs of Israel for so many years. He was angry about so many things, perhaps, that God could have excused him just once and could have understood what he was going through. But much was given to him, much was expected. If we look through our own understanding, we would probably say that Moses was a victim, just a victim of his being a man. Because of the constant murmurs, no? Lagi tayo nakakarinig ng reklamo, kahit sa mga anak natin, sa mga kaibigan natin, puro ka ganito, puro ka ganyan. The hard-headedness of the Israelites. The act of Moses and his words show us that even him fell into the lack of trust in God. He was not sure that if he were to command to the rock that water would gush out, it would come out. Kinabahan siya. Kaharap niya yung mga tao eh. He didn't trust God. Ayaw niya mapahiya. Kaya yung rod na ginamit niya, na divide niya ng water, ng Red Sea, na lagi niyang gamit, yung rod niya, kailangan niyang gamitin kasi mas may tiwala siya sa sarili niya, sa rod niya, hindi sa Diyos. So, because of that distrust, that lack of faith, it was not an excuse. He had no excuse to disobey and distrust God. We have no excuse to disobey and distrust our God. We listen to the angel's message. We listen to our speakers day in and day out. We have no reason and we have no excuse. God will not excuse us for our lack of faith, especially if we claim that we know Him. For someone like Moses who knows God face to face, this was unacceptable. Much is given, much is expected. In Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 48 to 52, it says, go up into the Abiram range to Mount Nebo, etc., etc., and you will die and be gathered to your people. You will die. This is because of you, because both of you, Aaron and Moses, because both of you broke faith in me in the presence of the Israelites. Nasaktan ng Diyos. Nasasaktan ng Diyos if we break our faith with Him. And because of that, you will die. Moses showed lack of faith. Of all the people, God talked to him face to face. He still showed lack of faith. In other words, brothers and sisters, maybe, perhaps, we could use that as an excuse. Hindi ko naman kausap ang Diyos face to face eh. But no. Blessed are those who have seen and believed, but more blessed are those who have not seen and yet believed. He did not hallow God before Israel. Moses was the standard looked upon by the Israelites, and their perception of Moses necessarily reflected their own trust to God. In 2